Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming. We're doing things a little bit differently this time, as you can see. Unfortunately, I don't have my my CEO, Andrew, here to help me with the wonderful flowery introduction, so you just get me. As you can see, due to social distancing, the office is pretty empty around here, which is fine. Suits me just fine. I don't mind staying safe. Hope everybody else is staying safe. So welcome to our webinar. Let's get it started. So first of all, who am I? My name is Eric Malice, and I am the Chief Product Officer as well as the co-founder here at National Test Systems. I have almost 20 years experience, and in all the time doing this, I've always had a quest or a thirst or a drive for a better understanding of all things clinical toxicology, but especially as it relates to what we're doing here, to drug testing, to what we're all doing. Today is another in our ongoing series of educational webinars. We bring these to you in hopes of enlightening you, educating. We feel it's as important for you to be educated as it is for us to be educated. If nothing else, we're hoping to make your daily drug testing duties a little bit easier, or at least a little bit more insightful. So today we've got about a 20-minute presentation, after which we'll follow it up by a question and answer session. As you can see on the left pane or the left panel of your screen, there is a button for chats and a button for questions. If you would please focus your questions on questions, whether you enter them now or as we get to the end, that's fine. And I will try and get through all the questions, first come, first serve. If for some reason we run short of time and we're unable to get to all the questions, just know that your consultant's going to be reaching out to you in the next day or so. And at that time, they'll be able to get any missed questions. But more importantly, they're also going to give you an opportunity to suggest topics for future webinars or suggest topics for one-on-one training, either direct for you and me or me and your whole staff or whatever it might be on whatever subject that might be useful to you or helpful to you and your staff in making your daily drug testing duties a little bit easier. So what are we talking about? Today, we're going to discuss current drug trends. We're going to talk about drugs that are making a comeback, drugs that are falling out of favor, basically what's hot and what's not of drugs. We're also going to have a focus on designer drugs and what that term even means, if it really means anything. So I'll break that down a little bit further for you as we get there. Now, what are my sources for this material? Now, the big focus of today's presentation is the DEA's National Drug Threat Assessment. This is an annual report that the DEA puts out that covers a huge range of topics, and it's perfect for people in our position, my position, your position. This year's report is about 152 pages, and it covers everything from drug trends, it covers transnational gangs, it covers street gangs, it covers money laundering, it's broken down into territory, into area, and it really has a lot of good information. And now we post the recording of this webinar, as we will do hopefully tomorrow, if not later today. Keep an eye on the text below it. We're going to make sure we include links to both the DEA's National Drug Threat Assessment, which again is annual, and we're also going to links to the DEA's Emerging Threat Report. Now that one comes out quarterly, biannually, and annually. So we get a few of those a year, and it's another good helper. That one kind of focuses more on what new designer drugs. And again, when we get to that section, it'll be a little more clear what we're talking about when we say that. Now, it is important to note that because this is such a huge undertaking for the DEA, I mean, this is really a lot of information. They really compile so much data. It's crazy. That most of the charts we're going to look at, the graphs end at about 2017, 2018. It's a huge, slow-moving agency. It takes some time to compile their data. So what I've done, in addition to the information that we're going to be looking at, the charts we're going to be looking at, I've also put in 100+ hours doing local and national media study, research, reading local police blotters and other law enforcement reporting. So on a couple of these, while the chart may end at 2018, I will try my best to fill you in on the information between that and currently, based on the research that I've done in these areas. So without further ado, let's go on to the actual report. So the first thing on the report is controlled prescription drugs. Now, or CPDS is what they're calling them. Now, last year's chart, this is another thing, by the way, I'm going to be critical of last year's version of this same webinar because some of the charts I chose weren't the best. Unfortunately, you kind of dealt the hand you get with the National Drug Threat Assessment, and I do like the way they compile the information, but you might hear me, rag on last year's Eric for picking a bad chart. But anyway, in this case, it's a little different. Last year, we looked at legitimate sales of controlled prescription drugs. And I really did like that chart. That was a good one. It basically told us what legitimate prescriptions were given for medications. And if you've been to any other of my webinars, you know I'm a big believer in the fact that a lot of drug addiction begins at home, begins in the medicine cabinet, begins in mom's medicine cabinet and grandma's medicine cabinet. There's a lot of seriously dangerous and addictive drugs that people just have in their medicine cabinet. It's just part of the world we live in these days, unfortunately. Now, what this chart is looking at this year is overdose deaths from controlled prescription drugs. So it's a little more severe. Another thing I'm kind of critical of about this chart, first of all, let me break it down for you. It's very opioid-centric. We can see prescription opioids, and that's been pretty flat. We see antidepressants, and that's always going to be the low end of the list. We see psychostimulants with abuse potential in the light blue. Now, unfortunately, that contains methamphetamine. So methamphetamine is not really a prescription drug. I mean, there's a handful of prescriptions that include methamphetamine, but I don't know that it should have made the list. Maybe it was just done for comparison purposes. I don't know. But I don't know if that's fair to include that one here. The other thing I have about this chart, and you're going to ask me why I bothered to use it at all, is the one in red. The other synthetic narcotics, that includes fentanyl. Now, as if you've been to either of my fentanyl webinars, you'll know the fentanyl that we're seeing having such a problem with in this country is not from prescribed fentanyl. It's all illicit fentanyl. It's coming from black market labs. It's coming out of China. It's supposedly sold as research chemicals. It's illicit fentanyl. So that data is included in this list under other synthetic narcotics. And that's, again, the spike in overdose deaths is still serious, and fentanyl is still a very serious drug. In fact, fentanyl's a couple of paces down on our list here. Whether it should have been included on this list, on this chart or not, it's an argument for a different day. But anyway, it's good to keep an eye on what where the overdose deaths are coming from. Another interesting thing is the psychostimulants with abuse potential. That's going to include all of your amphetamines, methamphetamines. It's going to include your Ritalin. If you remember, we were talking about Ritalin last time. Another dangerous drug that, again, found in the medicine cabinet, where a lot of addiction begins. So next on the list is heroin. Now, it's very interesting. The DEA has able to gather so much information from the drugs they confiscate. They're able to look at the chemical makeup of the finished product and figure out where it was made, what region the natural ingredients were grown in. So they really have the means to really break this stuff down to really get a better picture, where everything's coming from, which gives them better tools to be better law enforcement, hopefully keep a little bit more of it out of our country and out of the hands of people who it's dangerous. So what the chart that we looked at last year was admitted use. That's a fair chart. I mean, I would imagine with something that's something that's frowned upon as much as heroin, the amount of admitted use is going to be probably a lower number than the actual use, but it's going to be a fairly consistent number. We're not going to come to a time in history where heroin is so acceptable that they decide, of course I use heroin. What's the big deal? So that last year's chart wasn't bad. This one I like better just because it's focusing again on overdose deaths. So if we look at this chart, we'll see heroin in the lighter color. And the wording here is poor, but the heroin, as you can see, starting in 2010, and it broke off from the heroin without fentanyl in about 2013. And we can see that the heroin with fentanyl is still peaking. I mean, it went up twice, twofold basically in 5 years. And if we look at the numbers for 2018 and 2019, it's still on an upward trajectory, not as fast as it was growing from 2012 to 2014, but it's definitely still on an upward trajectory. Now, as you also can see on the chart, heroin without fentanyl has actually made a downturn as far as overdose deaths. There's just not as much heroin on the street anymore. Most of it is now fentanyl, or at least heroin mixed with fentanyl. So heroin seizures and Mexican production of heroin are down. They were flat for a few years, and now they're actually down just a little bit. And again, that's because it's being overtaken with fentanyl. So again, fentanyl is still something we need to consider very much on our daily radar. It's something that is still obviously very dangerous, causing a lot of overdose deaths, still at pandemic levels. So definitely don't lose sight of that. As an aside, looking at the other information in the report, most of the heroin that we're seeing in the United States is actually made in Mexico. All right, speaking of fentanyl, here is the fentanyl page. So last year we did reports of fentanyl use and reports of fentanyl deaths from overdose. That wasn't bad. That was a pretty good chart, actually. The chart we're looking at here, and you're going to hear me go back to this one a few times today. This information is from the National Forensic Laboratories Information System. So what this is it is basically a compilation of confiscations of drugs from every level of government. We've got the local, we've got state, we've got county, we've got sheriff, we've got tribal, we've got federal government. All this information is reported back to the National Forensic Laboratory. And in their information system, we get to see these real numbers, these numbers that are, I mean, obviously it's huge, and it's something that we can track very consistently, which makes it very easy. So again, you're going to hear me go back to the NFLIS a few times for some of the other slides. But let's focus on this fentanyl for a minute. So again, this is basically all of the fentanyl that's been confiscated in the years that it's showing. Now, fentanyl is still increasing, and it went up 65% from 2016 to 2017. When I pulled the numbers from 2018 to 2019, I'm sorry I couldn't find a chart to share with you on that exact thing. While not quite at 65% increase year to year, it's definitely still on the increase. And I said it 2 slides ago, we got to watch out for fentanyl. Still a very serious concern in this country, not going away anytime soon. Now remember, fentanyl, if you've been to either of my fentanyl webinars, fentanyl's 100 times more potent than morphine and heroin. So there's just so much more profit, and the cartels are basically able to profit so much more. They don't need acres of poppy fields to grow their product. It's made in a small laboratory. So do keep that in mind that, again, fentanyl's not going anywhere anytime soon. All right, next we'll talk about cocaine. Again, I went back to the NFLIS again. It seems to be my favorite metric, just raw amount of confiscations. And so basically this chart is showing that between 2006 and 2014, there was definitely a downturn in cocaine. That was a good sign. Unfortunately, we are now seeing cocaine picking back up. It's making a comeback. And it's been on an upward trajectory since its recent low in 2012. And again, it's still slow in comparison with something like fentanyl, but it is definitely making a comeback, and it's definitely a drug to watch for. Now, backing up a sec, again, this is based on national data. So if you wanted to have a conversation with me about your area, you want to, again, read the actual report itself, which I'll be linking when we post the recording, it does break it down by territory. So you'll be able to see if cocaine's really making a comeback in your neighborhood, or it's just as a nation as a whole, if it's making a comeback. So that might be good information to have. And again, you can find it on the report. You can call me. We can schedule a call. I'll make a webinar for you just for your area, and see which drugs are really, really happening and what you really, really need to be on the lookout for. Now, the price is slightly down and the purity is slightly up on cocaine, and that's part of the reason why we are seeing a resurgence. Of course, everybody likes to, get more for their money, basically. So that's another reason we're seeing it. Most of the cocaine we're seeing in the United States these days is coming from Colombia. Again, we talked about that with heroin, where they're able to look at the chemical structure, figure out exactly where it was processed, where the coca leaves were grown. So it's good information. It makes it a lot easier for them to do law enforcement. And then border states like Florida, Texas, and California make up the highest number of NFLIS reports, which of course we can expect. These are all places that have big borders, where it's easy. Florida, we've got a huge maritime border. We can, there's smuggling boats going all the time. Go back and watch Miami Vice from the 80s. You'll see what I'm talking about. And then one really sad part about cocaine making a comeback is we are seeing a slight uptick in crack cocaine use, which we never want to see crack make a comeback. Luckily, it's not terrible, compared to the cocaine comeback, but unfortunately, it has gone up slightly since last time it was reported. All right, next is methamphetamine. So the chart last year, we talked about methamphetamine was rehab admissions, which was okay. I mean, if somebody's getting help for a drug, it's a problem, it's a use. But again, for this one, this is showing seizures at the southwest border. So I think this is a much better metric for what methamphetamine is really doing out there. So as you can see, from 2013 to 14 wasn't a huge increase. It's almost growing, I don't want to say exponentially, but each year the increase is a higher percentage than the year before. So we got to watch out for methamphetamine. Again, this chart goes to 2018. Numbers for 2019 support this information. It is on a continued growth spurt. As for the other image on this slide, I thought this was very interesting. So in addition to all the information I've already told you about in the National Drug Threat Assessment, there is a series of photographs, like on the gang information, there's photographs of the tattoos, so you know what gangs they could be in. On a lot of the drug pages, they talk about the smuggling. Now, the image in this photograph is actually 2 drill bits. These are drill bits for offshore oil rigs. So these drill bits were sent from Texas to Mexico to be repaired. When they came back repaired, they were stuffed to the gills with methamphetamine. So the cartels are becoming kind of clever when it comes to trying to get the drugs into the country. Luckily, it looks like our DEA was on the ball and was able to at least stop these drill bits from getting to their intended source. So I just thought that's interesting, and maybe that'll tempt you to take a further dive into the National Drug Threat Assessment. Again, don't expect you to read all 152 pages, but a little perusal is probably a good thing. So let's see, do we have anything else? Most of the methamphetamine is coming from Mexico, and domestic production of methamphetamine, in other words, production in the U.S. is down. That's really good. Nobody wants a meth lab blowing up in their neighborhood. I mean, nobody wants a meth lab in their neighborhood, period. But it's nice to know that we're not seeing as much of that in the United States as we once were. These Mexican cartels, they've got a lot of money. So these labs, I don't know if anybody watched Breaking Bad. He's in that basically what I would call a super lab. I mean, it looked like a pharmaceutical company's laboratory. That's not far from truth. That's really what a lot of these laboratories are like. So because of that, we're also seeing an increase in the potency and a decrease in the cost, which is, again, leading towards a surge in use of methamphetamines. All right, next we go on to marijuana. So the chart we used last year for marijuana was admitted users in the past month. And we saw that usage was up. We saw that admitted usage was up. And at the time, our thought, and we discussed it on the webinar, was chances are, as marijuana becomes less stigmatized, as it becomes legal for medical use in a lot of states, legal for recreational use in a lot of states, we're seeing a lot less shyness about it. And it's not like heroin, where you're not going to readily admit using heroin. A lot of people, especially medicinal users, are happily talk about the medicine that's helping them, whether it be free from pain or whatever it might be. So last year, we did see an increase in admitted use of marijuana. We didn't really think it was necessarily an increase in use in marijuana. It was just an increase in admitting it. So that's why I like this chart a little bit better, although there's still a lot of caveats here. So this chart is showing, again, NFLIS information. I told you I'd be coming back to them a few times. So this is total confiscations over time. So as we can see, in about 2009, 2010, when states started legalizing either for medical or recreational use, as they started legalizing it, there's a lot less black market marijuana to be had out there. So we have confiscations are way down. And as more states make it legal, we're going to see this number continue to tick further down. It's a much smaller black market than it once was, because you can just go in some states to the corner store and not be using an illicit drug, at least as far as that state law is concerned. Now, one upside of the legalized marijuana is that a lot of these transcontinental organizations, these gangs, these cartels. This was a big source of income for them. And a lot of that income was used to fund things like human trafficking, much more dangerous drugs like methamphetamine and fentanyl. Excuse me. So the hope here is that as some of these states have, taken away the black market for a lot of U.S. sales of marijuana, it has cut out one source of income for a lot of these cartels, and hopefully the hit to their income is slowing down other more dangerous aspects of their business, as it were. So we'll see if that really pans out or not. All right, and that takes us to NPS, or new psychoactive substances. Now, this is where we are when we're talking about designer drugs. So the term designer drug is kind of a made-up term. It's not a real word. It's something that somebody decided to use because they thought it had a good definition. It fit what they were trying to explain to people, and it happens a lot with words. The best definition that I like for for designer drugs, it is a drug that is completely synthetic. In other words, made in a laboratory. There's no organic ingredients. And B, it's made to mimic the effects of another drug. So in the slide here, you see we're talking about mainly bath salts and K2 spice. So let's break that down a bit further if we can. So again, for designer drugs, we say K2, K3 spice or synthetic cannabinoids. Again, synthetic, it's fully synthetic. It's all chemicals. And it's a cannabinoid. And then it's meant to mimic the effects of THC or cannabinoids. It's meant to interact with the cannabinoid receptors in the human body. So that, I would say, is designer drug. We took this chemical and we designed it to try and do this thing that this other natural substance does. So that's why I would consider this, for example, to be a designer drug. Now, there are more than 100 synthetic cannabinoids. I've listed them all there for you. So it's hard, especially in the beginning when these things were just becoming popular. It's kind of hard for us as drug testing company. It's kind of hard for law enforcement to keep up with all 110 something synthetic cannabinoids. And then taking it a step further, not all synthetic cannabinoids are bad. For example, there's a drug called nabilone, which is prescription med for nausea associated with chemo here in the US. And it is prescribed for chronic pain in Canada. So again, it's a synthetic cannabinoid. It's not a dangerous street drug like what we're looking at with a lot of these K2 spices. Now, the other drug that comes to mind when we talk about designer drugs is bath salts. Again, bath salts, a huge, huge category of drugs. It's more than 220 synthetic cathinones. So again, this is a designer drug because A, it's synthetic, completely made in a laboratory, and it's a cathinone. It is mimicking the effects of the cat plant, which is like a flowering shrub in Southeast Asia, which is a mild stimulant. It is what they call a cathinone. So these synthetic cathinones are a huge, huge class of drugs. Again, I've listed them all here. Most of it looks just like alphabet soup of chemical names. So it's also important to bring this up because, we'll get the phone call, hey, do you have a test for bath salts? Yes. Do we have a test for all 220 bath salts, or do we have one test that will detect all of these? No. So it's important to try and figure out which bath salts you're seeing in your neighborhood, if at all possible. Now, that's where the emerging threat report comes in. Now, this is very helpful. Again, this is released quarterly, and they do a biannual report, and then they do an annual report. And this really focuses, well, there's a couple of focuses, but the big focus on this is, again, my definition anyway, of designer drugs. Here they break down exactly which synthetic cathinones they're finding and which synthetic cannabinoids they're finding. So if we look at this chart, for example, this was the year-end 2019 report. We see that there were 175 reported synthetic cannabinoid identifications in calendar year 2019. Now, this is nice because this represents an almost 200% decrease from the year of 2018. So basically, the amount of synthetic cannabinoids, which realistically means the amount that's out there, has been basically halved. So that's indeed good news, whether word's getting around that these things are not safe, whether it's becoming that much harder for these shady manufacturers to bring these things into the country. It is indeed a good news that this number is down. So that's, I didn't have very much good news in today's webinar, but that is one of them. The other one here is on the synthetic cathinones. There were approximately 184 identified cathinones in this reporting period, and this represents an approximately 78% decrease from calendar year 2018. So again, not only are the K2, K3 spices going down, the bath salts are going down. And again, I don't know, somebody's got a good PR department and is making sure that these things are known to be dangerous, but whatever the case may be, it has reduced. And this is important to note because in the year of the calendar year 2016 to 2017, synthetic cathinones were up 36%. So this is a pretty good reduction back to even below 2016 levels. So that is indeed good news. And again, you can look at these charts and you can see which bath salts are the most commonly confiscated. If you go further into the National Drug Threat Assessment, you can see where, and then figure out if the bath salts test that you're hoping to use is really going to detect the bath salts that are being used in your area. All right. I do not see that we have any questions, but I am going to check the chats in case any of the questions ended up there. Call the webinar, strange problems with sound, trying to connect, all thing good. All right. It looks like we don't necessarily have any questions today with that webinar, which means I did my job well. Although I guess we'll hear about it tomorrow when people go, I tried to type a question, but it didn't work. So I want to thank you guys all for coming out today. I know your time is important. It's important to us to share time with you because we want to help you guys. Again, we want to make your daily drug testing duties easier and more insightful, just to have a better idea what's going on. So so you're better at what you do. And it just makes it better for all of us. So I'm glad you took your half hour to spend with me today. I really do appreciate it. And when your consultant reaches out to you, if you've got a good idea for a webinar, by all means, share it. We're always excited to bring you new information. And hopefully we'll see you in the next 2 months or so when we do the next one. Thanks, everybody. Have a wonderful day.